San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hi, I'm Kim Dwinell. I'm an illustrator, animator, professor, and I'm a lifelong surfer and lover of the ocean.
Hi, and welcome to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. We're so glad you're joining us today. I'm Laura Jones, Operations and Programming Coordinator for Comic-Con International. And today I'll be joined by three amazing creators to discuss the graphic novels they've created for young readers. We have Jarod Roselló, who is the creator of Red Panda and Moonbear, and Julian Sakai, who collaborated on the art and story for Chibi Usagi, Attack of the Heebie Chibis. Today's panel will be talking about these great books and about graphic novels for middle grade readers. And I'm so excited to talk to you all. And yeah, do you want to introduce yourselves and a little bit about your books?
Yeah, definitely. I'm Jarod. As you mentioned, my book is Red Panda and Moonbear. And the sequel, which is coming out in January, is called subtitled The Curse of the Evil Eye. And so largely the universe is about these two Cuban-American siblings, Red Panda and Moonbear, who have these magic hoodies and who keep their neighborhood safe from monsters, and they solve mysteries and they sort of help out. They're not vigilantes, they're kind of part of their community, like this is their role and this is how they contribute to their community. And book two, The Curse of the Evil Eye, is about all of these sort of bad luck kind of things that are happening around town, and the kids believe it's being caused by mal de ojo, which is the evil eye, which through its powers of jealousy can come to sort of contaminate or ruin or destroy the things that people love and care about, and so they're out to stop it.
And I'm Stan Sakai. I am a cartoonist. I have been working on the Usagi Jimbo series for the past 37 years. And Chibi Usagi and Attack of the Heebie Chibis is the first novel-length book by my wife Julie and myself. It involves Chibi Usagi and his friends as they help the Dogu people of Japan. And it's a fun story about relationships, friendships, and overcoming adversities in this world. As I said, I'm a cartoonist, and so is my wife Julie. She does more chibi style, so this was greatly influenced by her.
Yeah, it's a really, really cute book, and I think, yeah, definitely a great one for kids. When you're writing for kids, do you change your style at all? This is your first one you've done in this style.
Greatly so, and I take a lot of my lead from Julie because she was not raised on comic books or graphic novels or sequential art. So when we collaborate on the stories, she kind of tempers me a lot.
There's no killing.
Also, the storytelling, the pacing, and the composition of the panels are simplified, which is more Julie's forte because she's able to tell the story, or her compositions are much cleaner, a lot more readable.
No, well,
yeah, well,
it's a different style.
Mm-hmm. But it's a good collaboration. We've collaborated before for years, but this is our first major collaboration.
And Jarod, I think one of the beauties about your book is it's sort of for kids, but it's grappling with these larger issues. And what's something that you think is really important when you're writing a book for kids, for middle grade readers?
So this book was really, I do a lot of work with children in and out of school, drawing comics and telling stories. And I was really inspired by the ways in which kids are sort of unafraid when it comes to how they construct their narrative. And so I think as adults, we're always thinking like, well, what logically comes next? And kids are more like, what could happen next, right? What sort of in an imagination-based narrative could happen next? And so when I made this book, I wanted to try to harness some of that potential energy where every panel could open up and unfold into like a wilder or more unusual story, and not necessarily one that felt like it was logically coming next. And so that's not necessarily how I've been trained to think as a writer and a storyteller, but I really wanted to try to harness some of that energy. And so working with kids is really helpful to keeping me sort of in that space and thinking in that way, and pushing myself to tell stories that are sort of wild and unusual. And then, you know, balancing that very specific, concrete day-to-day life of kids with these big saving the world, saving our families, keeping our community safe sort of stories that I think, you know, navigating that sort of tension between here's this really, really big story, but it also has these very specific, concrete implications for these kids in this town and in this family.
Yeah, I think both books really have like a moral or a lesson the characters learn going through. And is that something you start with and then try to make the story fit the lesson, or does it kind of come about as you're creating the story?
I think it was an organic experience because when we collaborate, we kind of just discuss things and what ifs, and it just all came together. And I think that's a lot like life. So my feeling is you want to create a story that allows the child to really grapple and think in a safe environment, and then it'll teach them as they grow older to always question and learn through their experiences.
Yeah, I believe that comics, graphic novels can also educate as well as entertain. So we put in, well, I always try to put in some kind of moral, or at least so to get away with, they always learn something, such as with the Chibi Usagi book, it takes place in Japan. So we have things like, it opens up with the heroes, the protagonists catching unagi, which is Japanese freshwater eels, and they use a traditional unagi trap. And there's references to Japanese history and culture throughout, and it's always explained. And there's story notes in the background that gives more information about aspects of the story that we've touched upon. So yeah, we've always tried to put some form of education into an entertaining story.
Yeah, I think my storytelling is probably pretty similar, which is that I come up with, you know, I know these characters and here's a situation, and I want always to sort of push my characters, you know, to explore. I feel like in order to understand the shape of something, you have to get to the edges of it. And so I think stories that help push our characters to their edges also help reveal their character and who they are and what they're capable of. And so that's always, I think, what I want to do. And then in that process, I'm asking myself usually like, what's happening to them in this moment? And so what are they learning? And so sometimes I think the moral isn't this big moral, like, you know, take life, take life seriously, or don't take life for granted or anything. But sometimes it's a very specific lesson that's grounded in this context and in this moment and in this story. And so I always kind of want to look for that specific thing there, which might be like a new understanding, or might just be a better understanding of yourself, or an understanding of something of the world that seemed more complex than it was. Sometimes maybe just an affirmation that what you thought was true actually is true. And so I think sometimes that's enough too.
Yeah, I mean, I think in both books, the lesson kind of comes out naturally as the characters are exploring. And I think you're right. And that's the way that kids learn things is by that exploration and by that journey. And I love, in both books about how each character sort of goes on this journey. And Stan, you mentioned, it's something I noticed too, that in both books, other languages were used, and it was sort of, they felt very inclusive, and is that something that all three of you do deliberately? Is that something a conscious choice, or is that just part of who you are, and so it naturally comes out?
I'm a fourth generation Japanese American, and I still use some Japanese baby words to explain things, and it's just part of my language, and it was just passed on through generation. So it's an organic thing that just comes out, and it's fun to share it with all cultures, and they pick it up, and it's kind of silly but fun and educational.
Yeah. And I do the same thing with my regular series, Usagi Jimbo, where I would use Japanese words when appropriate, when it gives the meaning so much better, more depth. But it's always explained when it's used in the context of the story.
Yeah, for me, it's just, I'm first generation Cuban American born in the United States. And so growing up, that's just what life was like, sort of mixture of English and Spanish, mixture of histories, mixture of cultures. And so I wanted to try to capture some of that often. My Spanish isn't that great. And so I wanted the same thing for the kids. Their Spanish is not that great, but their grandparents are still going to talk to them in Spanish. And they might answer them in English or at times in Spanish, depending on the situation or the context. And I just wanted that to feel kind of real and natural. And so I didn't overthink it. I just went with what felt right in that moment and in this context. Trying not to translate as much as possible, because I think that's also part of it, was just you hearing all these different languages, and sometimes you know it and sometimes you don't, and sometimes the context has to help you out with that sort of thing, but also wanting to be mindful that you don't need to understand that line, and let's say to comprehend the narrative. If you miss it, you can still understand the story. That's okay too. And so but maybe it encourages you to go and learn it. Or if you speak Spanish, which I sort of think that's who I write for. So I'm just assuming that all my readers know those terms. And so here's a gift to you.
And I think that's like the beauty of comic books, graphic novels, because there is so much that you can glean from the drawings, and even for young kids who are just learning to read or struggling to read, or who can't even read yet, I think would still enjoy these books because they're so expressive, and you can kind of tell what's going on through the pictures and through the emotions on the characters' faces. And I think that's a really great way to get kids excited about reading. So you mentioned, you grew up in kind of that's kind of how you grew up. Do you think you find yourself writing books for your younger selves? Like the books you wish you would have read, or that you wish you had, to share with the young people in your life?
Exactly. For me, a lot of these books that I write are stories that I would have enjoyed, or I do enjoy now. So I write for the readers, but I write for myself as well.
I think subconsciously that's what I do, and it's really good therapy, I think. It's, going back and fixing things, or having certain characters unite for the main character, and being more inclusive, and it's a very supportive world. And I think for kids, if they're not, our characters are very relatable, and I think it helps the reader feel a part of them, or either part of the group, or if they're lonely, then they can be one of them. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, similarly, I certainly, I think, write for myself and what I'm excited about and interested in. I think, when you write for what you love, that's when you get the best material out anyway. But as a kid, I loved animation and cartoons, and that never really had a place. Like, loving that and caring about that never really mattered to anyone, teachers, adults around me. And I find that being a cartoonist, finally, all those things that were liabilities when I was a kid are now sort of strengths that I have and get to channel into the work that I'm doing. And so I think I draw from a lot of those those inspirations, and I watch a lot of cartoons, and then and I also make books for my kids. I have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and so I'm all, they're the audience, the age range of my books. And so I do, you mentioned earlier the images helping kids as readers. I test a lot of my facial expressions on my kids. I'm like, what does this face mean to you when you see it, And so, because I think there's there's that sort of visual literacy, but also images are not universal either. And so sometimes what we think from our generation says something different to another generation. And so,
Yeah, I mean, I think comics are such a great way to get, kids excited. My kids who are only 3 and 5, they read graphic novels because they don't really know, they're not sure what exactly it says, but you can get so much from it. And when the images are great, like these books, you can almost tell your own story with it. And I just have to say, I loved in Attack of the Heebie Chibis how it was so relatable, because like one of the characters, like big concern is like, well, what about dinner? Throughout the whole story, it was like, well, when are we going to eat dinner? That's definitely a concern for most children. Also, in Red Panda and Moon Bear, I think the characters of the bad dogs I really enjoyed. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, or why you chose to make them not, I don't want to give too much away, but so you want to talk about a little bit about the bad dogs?
Yeah, and so it's in book 1 we meet their sort of pets, which are these 2 bad dogs that they rescue from the neighborhood. And Red Panda and Moon Bear suspect that they might not actually be bad dogs, and I guess that turns out not to be true in more than one way. And so, they're well, this is about book 2. So in book 2, everybody knows they're monsters from another galaxy pretending to be dogs. So we can just say that. I think that's fine. I wanted to pick, what if you wanted to sort of ingratiate yourselves to humans on Earth, what better animal to take the disguise of, right, to get have instant access to humans than dogs. And so I think that sort of came about that way. But I actually, when I first started writing the book, I had no intention of them not being dogs. It just, my writing style is sort of discursive in that way, where just one chapter leads to the next. And these books are serialized. Every chapter is a standalone story. So it gave me that opportunity to kind of say, oh, well, this thing that was true in chapter 1 doesn't have to be true in chapter 10. Again, thinking about the way that kids sort of grow and build narratives and story structure. And so I wanted to sort of take whatever opportunities I could have to continue to unfold the story rather than to solve it all. So.
Yeah, and I think in both books there are characters, who might seem bad at first, but aren't really bad. And I think that's a really sort of maybe newer trend in books for kids, that there isn't a character who's just bad. And I think in both books there's sort of like these redeeming moments for characters, which I think is really important for kids. And I don't know if that's a deliberate choice, or just if that's something you guys could talk about. Because I think there's definitely some moments in Chibi. Usagi that are really like sort of heartwarming, because you think a character is going to act one way and they don't.
Well, for Usagi, the characters are friends, and the thread throughout the entire story, I think, is friendship and what you can do when you cooperate together. And one of the major characters at the very end has a big decision on which way he should go. And that,
so like love or fear.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people are like that. They're not all evil. They're not all good. I mean, there's different facets to every person.
Yeah, definitely. So, Jarod, you mentioned that you've always been to animation and comics, but nobody was really that interested in you being interested in them. Do you have advice for kids who are into comics or want to create their own comics? Or did we lose him? So maybe if Stan and Julie, you want to talk about that. If there's, do you have any advice for kids, especially who want to make comics, who like art and reading? And
well, my advice to kids: if you want to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. I've been reading all my life. I used to go to the library every Saturday with my best friend Harold, and I still read. And again, if you want to be a good artist, you have to draw. And you have to get input, show your work around. No matter how good you are, you'll never be known if you're just hidden away. Show them to show your artwork to friends, to teachers, to editors, professionals. Work your way up the chain, and if you really want to be an artist or a comic book artist, you have to draw, meet other cartoonists, and at least take a basic drawing class. Learn the basics of composition, perspective, and from there, the best thing you can do is show your work around, get input, find out what you're strong at, find out what your weaknesses are, and learn how to take advice, constructive advice. Like Julie used to teach art for a while.
Yeah, I think because there's so many wonderful teachers and librarians and parents, and they teach the kids not to just see, but to really look at something. And I think it's always looking at things with fresh eyes and analyzing it, because there's so much out there. And so I think a lot of times we can pause and really teach the kids to really see.
Are you so excited for sort of a whole new generation to discover your characters and fall in love with them? I mean, I think this would definitely
very much
a large universe.
Yeah, and we've collaborated on projects before, but like I said, this is the first major projects that we've done, and it was a learning experience for both of us. We work well together. However, I have always worked by myself. Usagi Jimbo, I write, I draw, I hand letter, and do everything. But with this one, it was great to have a collaborator. We could bounce ideas off of each other, and such as the ending of the story, basically all of Julie's artwork. I'm more used to doing sequential drawings, whereas she's more used to doing illustrations. So I would do the panel breakdowns, but then she would add to it. Julie lettered this book, and I've been lettering comic books for the last. All
these awards.
Well, yeah, but then I would letter the in pencil, rough out where the lettering should go. I would even do the rules to the guidelines for the lettering, and then she'd take the pages and erase everything.
Well, it's really hard for me to stay within the lines, and I think that's the difference between our art style. Is he's so precise and just a great artist, and whereas I'm more out there and I can't do math, I can't do perspective, and so I'm able to just be more freer. And
but I have to say, your lettering matches the art perfectly. We do have pieces where I did the lettering and you did the artwork, and there's some. I mean, it's okay. However, with Chibi Usagi, it just flows nicely.
Yeah, it's so seamless, and the story is so great. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, you talk a lot about the collaboration. And Julia, how was it for you? Was it exciting, or to sort of get in this longer form? And you really you should be really happy. Did you really love it?
It was intimidating because Stan is such a icon in the industry, and but he's just such a great teacher and mentor, and it's funny because he's learned. I think you're learning as well too.
Definitely.
To be patient.
To let go a bit more, not to be so obsessive about.
But it was a really nice collaboration,
yeah, it really was.
And we really enjoyed working together.
And it wasn't just a collaboration between Julie and myself. It was a family effort. Daniel, Julie's my stepson, Julie's son, was the one who approached IDW with this, and he negotiated the contract for us. Emmy.
Well, Daniel just came back one day. I mean, got off the phone and came into the studio and said, "Oh, we're gonna do a Chibi Usagi book." And it's like,
really?
What? So yeah.
This is a deadline.
and Emmy, she's a professional photographer, and she's just instinctively an artist, and so she colored all of the artwork and did an amazing job because she set the emotion and the tone.
And she had a theme for each scene, and she thought things out, and it's wonderful. And also, to even after Emmy had done the coloring, Julie would go back and add to the coloring.
So
all the details. We all worked well together, the entire family.
That's always really nice to hear. How many iterations before you settled on the designs of the Chibis? Was it hard? Were there so many?
No, not at all.
That's how you liked it right away?
Yeah.
Pretty much right away. Even before we were married, Julie had asked if she could do a Chibi Usagi T-shirt or onesie for kids, because she was doing craft fairs a long time ago, and so I gave her the license for that, and that was our first Chibi Usagi on a little infant onesie.
Oh, that's so nice. Jarod, welcome back. Is there any significance to the animals you chose for your characters? The red panda and the bear, and was it a decision about the hoodies instead of sort of like more formal, costumes or anything?
Superhero attire. Yeah, I feel like the hoodie is the costume of kids. At least it was for me, and growing up, and so it felt really natural. The hoodie, you put a hood on, and it just seemed like that kind of hybrid superhero costume that kids would have access to, and that is such a big part of childhood. And then the animals themselves, the red panda and the moon bear, those were the kinds of like cute animal nicknames that my wife and I used to refer to our kids when they were first born as. Just, I don't know, you know how you just can make these associations and then they're just there. And so when I was writing this book, it was really sort of taking them and their personalities and putting them into these cartoon characters. And so that seemed like the sort of natural way to do that. And so that was kind of how that came around. And so there's no real great logical reason within the context of the story why they're called those things. I suspect that they like those animals though, and would just pick those as their hoodies.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it works with kids. They just like what they like.
Yeah.
Are there kids graphic novels you always recommend to people other than your own?
Well, Jeff Smith's work is amazing. I love Bone. And actually, I know Jeff quite well. Bone was a series that he thought of when he was in kindergarten. So it's just amazing. It's an amazing series, and I would highly recommend that.
I guess it's not a graphic novel, but I love Peanuts, and it's just so simple, and he's able to say so much in just hardly a few lines. So yeah, I think he has a lot of good lessons there.
Yeah, of course, like the what are your recommended books in that moment? You're always like, I've never read a book before, I don't know. But I some of my early inspirations was Jordan Crane's The Clouds Above, which is a book that I think it was like an indie press book, and not a lot of people know about it. It was such a great book. It's about a kid who finds a staircase at the top of his school, and it takes him on this sort of wild adventure with his cat, and I really love that book. I really like the Bird and Squirrel series. I think a lot of people know about that also, where it's just these sort of buddy adventures sort of going out there. And so the Cleopatra in Space series by Mike Mayhack is really great. There's like 100 on the shelf behind me that I could pull out and share also. But
yeah, I mean, it's just sort of like become like a booming genre, and it's really great to see. And I think one thing that's obvious in both of your books and a lot of those is I think there's the not shying away from complicated questions for kids. And I think it used to be sort of like these simple lessons, but both books have sort of like these more complicated questions. And you want to talk about shying away from difficult topics for kids, or how that works?
Do I see anything? Well, for us, we just talked about what seemed natural. The entire story just flowed naturally out of us. And then once the initial story was done, then we got critical. What are the subplots or the antagonists? How can we make them more interesting? And the relationship primarily between all the characters.
Yeah, I think a lot of there's a lot of different situations that people can glean from, but I think the main emphasis is choosing love over fear, and that can be applied to any situation, whether it's someone you don't know, a different culture, a different lifestyle, a different just anything, and I think if you can just teach the kids to learn to look at themselves and make that decision, I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, I think for me, it wasn't necessarily like an early choice that I made to do this or not to do this. It's just a sort of very natural storytelling process for me. But I do recall many instances where I was trying to figure out where the line was, like where, if there's a mutant ice cream monster in book 1 and they vanquish it, for lack of a better word. And so, should this ice cream monster be very sentient, or should it be just like a sort of, mindless monster sort of thing, right? And then they do vanquish it, and then they take a moment to wonder if they should have done that or not. Like, was that okay to do that or not, right? Like, save the town, but was that okay? In book 2, there's a chapter that deals with divorce and the instability at home and how that can be really scary and really destabilizing for kids. And so, I wanted always, of course, the book to be funny and exciting and that sort of thing. But I think you need that sort of tension between the real and the magical, the real and the sort of fantastic and cartoonish, in order to really kind of draw those things out. I also think that's kind of how kids live their lives too. Their worlds are so full of possibility, but can pivot so hard into something very serious that happens. I think about that Calvin and Hobbes strip where they find the dead bird out in the forest, or the baby raccoon that's injured, and it's these moments where Calvin goes from like this, empowered wild kid to suddenly like needing the support of his family and of Hobbes to sort of solve this issue. And so I really liked the ability of the cartoon itself to be able to pivot in that way, to be silly and wild and outrageous, but also to be serious and to address these concerns. And so
yeah, we're almost out of time. So if everybody wants to tell our audience where you can find your books, where you can find you online, and maybe who your favorite character is from your series.
Well, you can find our books online or order it at least through any bookstore. It's published by IDW. And favorite character is, for me, it's Chibi Usagi.
Mine is the Dogu character.
Mm-hmm.
It's a clay figurine. I'm really into pottery right now, so I really enjoy the character's personality.
Yeah, I get that's a tough question. The two characters are based on my kids, so I probably can't pick between them. I do think that the two dog characters in the books are probably my favorite, and so they're a much bigger part in the second book, and so their names are Destroyer of Worlds and Being of Unimaginable Horror, and so they'll come back in a bigger way. And you can find me online on social media, just at Jarod Roselló on everything, and then JarodRoselló.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to all three of you for sharing your work and your time with us today. We really appreciate it. You can purchase the author's books from our indie bookseller partners at the link below. And please consider supporting the San Diego Council on Literacy, and there's a link below for that as well. You can continue to join us for a full program of author panels, exciting demonstrations, and live entertainment streamed entirely online. All the videos will be available at the sdfestivalofbooks.com. And yeah, once again, make sure you run out and buy these books. They're excellent, and your kids will thank you. So thanks again for joining us. Again, I'm Laura Jones, and we really appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Bye, thanks.